Good evening, everyone. I have a nice small room today for so many people. We'll go ahead and get started. I will officially call to order the annual Portland Public Schools budget hearing. My name is Harmony Kiros. I am chair of the Tax Supervising and Conservation Commission. I welcome everyone to this hearing. As a reminder, the TSCC is a community oversight commission established by the Oregon legislature more than 100 years ago. The TSCC oversees the budgets of all TSCC member taxing districts and annually conducts a thorough budget review and certification process. Additionally, the TSCC holds public budget hearings like this one to engage with district leadership and provide additional opportunity for public comment before the budget is adopted. I will now ask my fellow commissioners and the staff to introduce themselves and state if they have any business relationships with the district that could be perceived as a conflict of interest. We'll start to my left.
Good afternoon. My name is Todd Burton, and this is my second year on the TSCC. I do not have any business relationships with the school district. In my former life, I was a finance officer for a couple of jurisdictions in the region and very familiar with local budget law and all of the things that you've worked on. Thank you.
My name is Rita Moore. This is my first year on the commission. I am a former policy analyst for the state and a former member of the Portland School Board. And I have no conflicts.
Hi, good afternoon. Allison Lugo-Knapp. This is my second year on the TSCC. I am an organizational development consultant. I also have a rising fifth grader at Atkinson in the immersion program and a rising seventh grader at Selwood Middle School, and I have no conflicts with the district.
Good evening. Matt Donahue, fourth year on the commission and currently vice chair. My day job is as a municipal bond investment banker and financial advisor. I have two daughters, one who just graduated from Grant. So I was there at the ceremony, so thank you for shaking her head. 480 other kids or whatever it was. And my other daughters will be a rising senior at Grant. And I have no conflicts with the district.
I'm Brittany Abiari, the budget analyst with TSCC.
And I'm Allegra Wilhite, executive director with TSCC.
Again, I'm Harmony Kiros. I'm chair of TSCC. This is my 7th and final year with the commission. I know, darn. So I'm going to ask all my questions tonight. I am a former middle school math and science teacher. I still work in K-12 science education, curriculum and assessment. So near and dear to my heart, I have we're talking rising, so close, 2 more days. I have a rising 3rd grader at Atkinson as well in Southeast Portland, and a rising 6th grader off to middle school at Harrison Park. And I have no conflicts with the district. And we'll go ahead and let district representatives introduce themselves as they come up to answer questions, if that works for all of you. We'll start with, we'd like to acknowledge the district's receipt of the Meritorious Budget Award for the fiscal 24-25 budget season. We always like to acknowledge those things because they help us as TSCC have clarity and transparency to read through the budget and understand what it means, but also the public as a whole. A clear budget document is best for everyone. We'll start with any introductory remarks from the district, after which we'll hear public comment. Then we'll ask our questions and discuss the budget with you. We're looking forward to a very robust conversation today. As a reminder, since we only have a short time with you today, we encourage you to speak directly and openly and keep the reading of any written comments brief to allow for more back and forth discussion. So I'll now turn the floor over to Dr. Kimberly Armstrong, Superintendent for Portland Public Schools.
Thank you all for being here. It's always an exciting time as we begin to conclude school and also get our proposed budget not only adopted but just finalized as we prepare forward. And so we received your questions. The team has had some time to drill down and get answers, and I hope will be a robust exchange. And just know that one of the things that we're proud of and should be taken into consideration is for the first time in the last 5 years, I think, or maybe 6 years, we have a full financial leadership team, and that wasn't the case before. And
Yes.
so we're so excited for our financial leadership team to be under the direction of Michelle Morrison, who's an experienced CFO from Hillsborough. And the team that she's assembled are also individuals who come with a really strong background on making sure that schools are fiscally responsible and that the accounting is as it should be. And so I thank you for being here, and I appreciate the time that you all spent going through our budget documents, and I look forward to the team answering whatever questions you have. So.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'll now call on any members of the public who would like to speak. Each person is limited to 3 minutes of public comment, and we'll let you know when you're nearing the end of your time. Allegra, do we have any members of the public signed up to testify?
Yes, we do. TSCC welcomes both in-person verbal testimony and written comments from the public. We have one of each today. So TSCC received a written public comment for today's hearing from John Charles, president of Cascade Policy Institute. The submitted comment discusses PPS's equity funding policy and its relationship to state and federal civil rights laws. The commissioners have received the full written public comment, and it is currently available on our TSCC website and will also be included in our meeting minutes. For our in-person public testimony, we have Naomi Inman. So Naomi, if you'd like to come up, we will have 3 minutes. I'll go ahead and start the timer. Alrighty.
Good afternoon, Chairperson Karras and TSCC. I'm here on behalf of Cascade Policy Institute to point out the public comment submitted by John Charles, as mentioned. And we believe this is a serious matter, as we believe the PPS budget does not comply with state and federal civil rights law. First, pages 4 and 5 of the draft budget, volume 2, chart rank order funding for all PPS schools, and Rosa Parks at the top has the highest funded and highest FTE K-5 school, allocating $16,560 per student versus $8,504 at Richmond, the last school on the page. This is a 2-to-1 difference in funding. In addition, the disparity in students per FTE staff is a full 3.5-to-1, while Rosa Parks has an FTE of 4.4-to-1, and Richmond's is 14.4-to-1. This notable disparity is driven by the district's equity funding policy, using both poverty and race as factors in weighting resources for K-8 schools. The district distributes money to schools with higher percentages of historically underserved students, which serves as a euphemism for the 4 races listed on page 2 of the budget. We believe this is a violation of state law statute 659.850, and that race needs to be removed from the equation so that every student in the PPS district has equal treatment regardless of race. ORS 659.850 prohibits discrimination in any public school on the basis of race, and PPS funding is clearly discriminatory. The statute tells us that discrimination includes unreasonably differentiated treatment and is discriminatory in operation based on race, etc. In short, these statutes tell us that when the legislature appropriates money to a school, that discrimination on based on race is not allowed. This also violates the federal law and Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which recent Supreme Court decisions have upheld. While it's lawful to skew funding based on socioeconomic factors, race should not be a factor. Last month, Abernathy Elementary shut down its reading literacy partnership because they no longer qualify through that equity lens. They started asking, and they want to understand why at-need students in their school should get less than their peers at other schools. That is exactly the right question to ask, as classifying every person through an equity lens is a euphemism for discrimination based on race rather than on the true needs of every child. We urge you to change this trajectory and withhold certification of the budget until they complied with all state and federal civil rights laws, both in principle and in practice. Thank you for your time and your service in our community.
Wow, right on time. Thank you so much for your testimony. Your comments will be entered into our public meeting record. We also took into consideration the written comments submitted by your colleague and are incorporated to the degree possible in our questions today.
Thank you, Harmony.
Yes. And that's it for today. Great. Okay, so we'll go ahead and dive into our discussion. And Matt, you have the first question today.
Thank you. So the Community Budget Review Committee's report to the board this year highlights one of PPS's biggest challenges, which is essentially a structural deficit to provide the education that the community wants. The committee further cautions that without a multi-year plan, PPS risks falling deeper into austerity, potentially compromising its commitments to equity, excellence, and innovation. How do you respond to these concerns, and what is the district's strategy for addressing its structural deficit?
Thank you for your question. Good evening. Michelle Morrison, District Financial Officer for PPS. This question has got very broad scope, and I think it's fair to say that a lot has to be determined yet as we continue to move forward in an environment where our resources are not keeping pace with our requirements. And so really student enrollment is a major driver of all of our funding sources. So that's something that we're taking into consideration. I did prepare something in writing, so if it looks like I'm reading, I'm actually reading. I do apologize for that. So we have taken a system-wide approach over the last 2 years on budget planning. The situation we're in today is unfortunate, but not entirely unforeseen. We've been working towards a resolution for a while. Given the magnitude of the imbalance, the district must continue to review the overall system of support for schools and students while maintaining our focus on district and board student outcome goals. Some system changes that have already been implemented with a focus on sustainability and school-based stability and flexibility. You're probably going to see more and more of that as we move through our future budget cycles, is really trying to strike that balance between what happens, how we move our community-wide goals forward while still balancing the needs of the local school environment. So one example would be this year, we reduced some of the supplemental staffing that we've been able to put in place and use to build capacity over the last couple of years since the pandemic, and we've begun to scale that back as we start to kind of re-normalize the staffing that we had prior to the pandemic. In the upcoming year, some shifts will include promoting blended classrooms at the 4th and 5th grade level, split classrooms, and allowing flexibility for additional blended grade level classrooms. That is a practice that we've had in Portland Public Schools, and we've seen success with it, but developing more of a programmatic approach to it, where training is provided, all of the supports for a staff member to transition from a straight grade classroom to a blend have been more normalized. And so I think that's a shift that we've made to kind of make better use of our FTE, our teaching FTE in the schools, our smaller schools especially. And then at the secondary level, having a high school class minimum of 15. So if you think about how much we get per student and how much a teacher costs, even that is still pretty low class size at the secondary level. I know we took extra care to make sure that programs weren't being eliminated due to that. So trying to find ways to group classes together in order to preserve programming was a big focus for us as well. Again, supplemental supports, trying to find the right fit for that as we continue to move forward with our district initiatives. And then, implementing organizational structural changes that will improve efficiency and result in cost savings. So an example of that would be the new ERP system that we're looking at implementing that will kind of help operationalize a lot of things that are really technical and manual right now and make better use of our staff time. I think moving beyond 25-26, the district is expecting another budget reduction of at least $32 million, given the trajectory we're on and the current assumptions we have our budget built on. And as those assumptions become actuals, there's a potential of some change, and we will continue to report out on that as it occurs. We'll be sharing enrollment and attendance campaign information later in this evening, and school staff have been actively recruiting to improve enrollment estimates. So we have the information that we've been provided, but we are implementing some new strategies to draw kids into our schools. And with the passage of the 2025 bond, thank you for your support in that. I know there were some mixed feelings in the community, but we were super thankful for that gift. The district will develop and share a school optimization plan in partnership with the community. So we recognize that we do have some changes in student location around the district and different conditions of our facilities and what that might mean as we move forward. So school optimization, that's a big focus for us coming up.
Thank you for the answer. I know, we all know, I assume that PPS is not the only school district to be facing these challenges around the state and around the country. Don't think that there's any district that has like a secret sauce to solve all of these problems with declining enrollment, but are there other districts that you know are doing some things that you can implement here in PPS, or things that they're doing that you wouldn't implement here in PPS?
Yeah. Thank you, Matt. I think, we are a pretty tight network across the state in terms of our administrators and our finance folks, and we do kind of see the high leverage strategies that are working in other districts. And so I think really being really strong with community partners is essential for rounding out that school experience for our students. And we have a lot of that in Portland, and that's very exciting. I would say that the shift to standardizing that 4th, 5th grade split in the classroom, that's a pretty common practice across the state, especially as the students come in the fall and they may not be in the exact packages we thought they would be in terms of grade level. And so that builds some flexibility into our system, but is also a common practice that works well elsewhere and creates efficiencies.
Thank you. Just another follow-up, and PPS and others, you've been advocating to the state for more adequate school funding. And we've heard that, I've heard that every year since I've been on this. It's an ongoing battle. I understand the state has different needs that they're balancing as well. But can you speak to where you think PPS can be successful in advocating for funding that would help the structural imbalance?
Yeah, thank you for that question. This legislative session has been very, very interesting as we see some changes at the federal level and also in just our local economies, what's happening. So the state revenue forecast shifted quite a bit from what we heard in March to what we heard last month. And of course, that's the one that sets the state funding and appropriation levels for the next 2 years. So we had done a lot of advocacy around additional funding for special education. And I think that, that was great advocacy and it was well heard, but I don't think there's the additional funding available to support a new initiative there. I do believe that the current service level calculations that were updated from last biennium to this biennium, that was a really strong improvement for us as well. And that took a lot of partnership and a lot of meetings to make that happen.
I'm just going to try and summarize what I heard. So, it sounds like we're not getting more money from the state, and we're still going to face structural deficits, at least for the short term, because of the economic forecast. And we're making incremental changes to the extent we can, optimizing 4th, 5th blends and some other, reducing supplemental staff and things like that, which are all these small, and then school optimization and school closures, right, is what that means, are kind of one of the maybe next big steps. Do we think there are other big moves the district can make in terms of trying to close this gap, or is we talked to MESD a few weeks ago, and we talked about it's just going to be hard. It's about kind of moving through this space, and it's going to be hard, and there's not a secret sauce like Matt said. Is that, or are there other kind of big changes that we might see?
That's a great question, and I'm not quite sure
you
how
can
to.
phone a friend too.
Yeah,
if you,
any friends are welcome to come up and join me, but I do think that some of this is just gradual over time as we respond to student needs, and we're going to have to be flexible in that space. So it might not be a big sweeping change, but small efficiencies throughout our schools and systems that are going to make the difference for us in the long run.
Hi, Deborah Kafori, Chief of Staff. I'm 100% agree with everything Michelle has said, and I wish I could say to you all, especially you PPS parent, that skies are going to be bluer tomorrow. But I do think that the changes that we are making, at the very least, getting us stable will help. And I know that it's hard to talk about stability when we're looking at a $32 million shortfall at least next year. But I think having the strong financial team in place, having the commitment that we are having to literacy and raising our scores for our students, I think that will help play into getting people to stay in PPS, getting more people to not choose alternatives, and that will help some. But I just don't see in the near future. I think what we're seeing right now might be as good as we get. We don't know what's happening with the federal government either. Yeah. We still remain committed to working with our parent communities and our nonprofit partners to lobby the legislature. It's not over yet, and we believe that the changes that we want to see, especially around special education funding, are the right thing to do, and that the legislature should follow the lead of Washington State and make dramatic changes at some point.
Thank you. Go ahead, Rita.
Unfortunately, PPS has faced similarly large consecutive budget shortfalls multiple times in the last 25 years. Faced with no good choices, the district has each time tried to preserve classroom educators and direct student services. But over time, multiple cuts to administration, maintenance, and other functions led to significant losses in institutional capacity that over time ended up impacting classes and exacerbated the district's long-standing problem of inequitable student experiences. In 2017, the superintendent described PPS as a district of schools, not a school district. So, central office positions have been cut significantly over the last 3 years. What impacts are you seeing in terms of support for schools and educators?
Thank you for that question. I am going to call up some friends that can help with some context.
We're going to get into some weeds here, so yeah, it's good.
Good afternoon. Oh, geez. John Franco, Chief of Schools.
Good afternoon. Christina Howard, Chief Academic Officer. I'm going to start us off by just reading a bit higher level, and then we have other folks who can call up if we're in the weeds. So while we're preserving direct student services, central office must still support the priority work that has the biggest impact on students and advances our board goals. We are actively evaluating what is essential to sustain that support and what is not. So in recent years, PPS has made key strategic investments that support progress toward board and strategic plan goals and enhance service delivery and academic outcomes at every PPS school. PPS has been advancing work on the implementation of a unified vision of teaching and learning, our first version of a culturally responsive and culturally sustaining instructional framework that identifies learning and teaching practices that support all students in attaining the graduate portrait. Additionally, the district invested in the adoption of high-quality learning materials for K-12 English language arts and mathematics. Professional development for teachers and principals have been another area of focus. And in recent years, instructional coaches allocated to every PPS school site to provide job-embedded professional development for teachers. PPS continues to use an equity lens in resource allocation, operating programs that serve focal students and using a differentiated staffing formula.
I think the only thing that I would add to that is, I think through our budgeting process, and that is in conversations with building leaders and various stakeholders, like there's a series of prioritization steps that we have to undergo in conversations. And so we're very proud about that we were able to, add back instructional coaches, that interventionists are still in play for schools based on data. We were also to add back some non-formula assistant principals, and this is all based on feedback from our building leaders. And so it is a prioritization piece that we will have to go through, because in the initial pieces we were like, okay, we want to protect class sizes as best as we can, but there was a definite push to maintain these positions. To your point, Dr. Moore, in terms of that level of support for kids.
Can you give us a sense of what % of the operating budget is spent on administration?
I think
so if I ask questions that are too deep in the weeds and you don't have the answers in front of you, you can always send them to us later.
Yeah, that is one. I would need Michelle to come back up here. I don't know if that's one thing that maybe we can get back to you, and I don't know if she can answer that question right up front.
Thanks, John. Yes, we do have that information available, but it kind of begs a few more questions. So when you ask about the percentage of administration, we have administrators in the building, in departments, and then we have some central office positions as well. And so without a little bit more detail, it's hard to parse it out.
Central office in particular, do you have?
Yeah, it's between 5 and 6% central office administration.
Okay.
Of our total administrative pool. I have a chart here that was provided by my team that says central office administration at 2.58%, which is a very different number, and I think that's looking more at just administrative staff. We have a lot of non-represented staff also that kind of provide that administrative support. So I think it's a bit of a range, but it's a fairly small percentage of what we need, that those folks make decisions and implement plans that really provide support for students.
Do you have a sense of how that's changed over time, or how it compares to comparator districts?
I think it's pretty similar to comparative districts. That's some data that we can collect and provide. I'm grateful that you're interested in that. It's going to come up for us soon in bargaining as well. But again, determining what you mean by administration is going to be important.
Right. I'm asking because in my experience, I've been involved with the district since forever. This is a question that comes up frequently. Parents ask, unions ask, the public asks. So I would encourage you to try to come up with a way to explain what these terms mean in terms of a school district, first of all, and then kind of put into context how PPS is, what financial resources are being dedicated to what people would think of as administration. Because I think it is very complicated. I mean, I've been around long enough to know it's complicated. And it's very difficult, I think, for just plain folks who don't have their heads in the budget books to really get a handle on kind of what impact administration plays in the functionality of a district and the classroom experience of students, and also how it's funded. So I guess a broader question I would ask is, can you give us a sense of how the district is planning to balance the need for preserving classrooms in the current crisis against the need for maintaining institutional capacity over the long haul. I mean, this is a dilemma that everybody we talk to is dealing with. Like, how do you deal with the, fire in front of you, and still preserve institutional capacity going forward? So, do you have since this crisis is probably not going to go away anytime soon, can you articulate an approach that PPS is taking to this dilemma? Or not?
I mean, I think we're looking at our priorities. So if our priorities for next year are literacy, math, 9th grade, success or on track, attendance, right? Then we would say, based on that, what supports are going to be needed? So for example, with literacy, when we're thinking about providing support to early literacy, we have folks who are providing professional learning to administrators, to teachers, to coaches. We have folks who are working on high impact tutoring. We have folks who are supporting the interventionists around professional learning. And so that's an example of a priority that we need to then support centrally. So those positions are critical, right? And then how are we funding those positions? Well, that's a combination of grants and it's a combination of general fund. And so then that's how we would look at that. And so when we look at also our focal students who are our focal students who need support, how do we fund that? What is our data saying? What supports at the school level could be supported at the school level, and then what supports will be at the central office level? And so those are all sort of the conversations, and then also bringing in principals for feedback. And what do they value as a support, and then what is not feeling supportive? Because again, every decision we're making has impacts in the classroom, is another impact that we have to talk about. So that's just an example.
And I would just piggyback on that. I think I don't want to also underscore that throughout this entire process is our superintendent has been very clear is that if there are positions potentially in line for reduction, what are the mitigating steps that we are going to employ? And so that's been an immense thought process that we've had to undergo. And I also don't want to underscore the importance of, we're in the midst of a K-12 math and language arts adoption and an immense focus instructionally on Tier 1. And when we can provide consistency of experience experience for students in regards to instruction, that to me is a layer that we can't discount. When all of our kids are receiving grade level standards aligned instruction across the board, will we need as many interventionists, right? If we're building and having the conversations about capacity and building the instructional leadership capacity of our building leaders, will we need instructional coaches? You know what I mean? And so I think that that's an important piece. That's really looking at, a little bit of a long game, but we find immense value, obviously, in that instruction component.
Is the ELA and math adoption part of a 10-year cycle, 6-year cycle? My job is in curriculum and assessment, so I know that it varies by state. But I'm curious, I know Wit and Wisdom is not that old, and I know a complaint you hear from teachers all the time is like, new curriculum, I have to learn a new thing all the time. I'm too busy learning a new thing to implement it faithfully, let alone do right by my students. And so I'm curious, can you give us a little idea of like what that cycle is and what was maybe when was the last adopted and what's the impulse for the new adoption?
Yeah, sure. So we're on 7-year adoption cycles, and we've worked really hard over the last few years to get on the state adoption cycle. So the state will put out when curriculum, and so we're aligning because then there's also standards that the state will adopt. And so we're trying to be really in close alignment, and that's taken us a while, and we are on that now. And so with the example of Wit and Wisdom, I think this is year 4. And so 3 years, right, it will be up again, and there's a whole process that involves teachers and teacher leaders and families, and we have a whole process for that. that has been, and then we present to the board. Actually, we're presenting tonight around science. And so it's according to the state adoption cycles.
So PPS reviews current kindergarten enrollment as part of developing enrollment forecasts. What about attrition at other points in the school pipeline? Do you look at enrollment trends in other grades? And what factors do you think are driving the decline in enrollment?
Hi, good evening. I'm Renard Adams. I'm the Chief Accountability and Equity Officer for the district. So, excuse me. Yes, we do review enrollment at all levels of the school system. And in particular, we look at grade progression. That is, how many students, say in 4th grade, continue with us to 5th grade, 6th grade to 7th grade, et cetera. And we see that grade progression rates have been fairly stable with the exception of the COVID years when those rules about attendance were changed and engagement was very difficult for many of our families and our students. The incoming kindergarten cohort is now, or cohorts, are now much smaller than those pre-pandemic, and they're also smaller than our current graduating cohorts of students and seniors in high school, resulting in some decreasing enrollment overall. When we examine the data, our trends show that our 5th to 6th grade progression has our lowest progression rate, and that our 8th to 9th progression rate has improved over time. Our internal analysis have not shown that there is or are significant enrollment declines at the higher grade levels.
Relative to those trends of, for example, students starting at PPS and then moving to other districts or to private school, I know you mentioned like that 5th to 6th grade progression, which as a parent, that's actually what I hear like on the playground, at the soccer fields, right? Parents talking about that being the big shift. Are you able to determine whether that will continue or increase or decrease over time at this point, or kind of what are your thoughts around that?
Sure. So we work with the Population Resource Center at Portland State University each year to update our enrollment projections. So we always are using a current forecast based on the most current data that we have. We are projecting an enrollment decline over the next several years, and we are working on enrollment strategies and enrollment campaign to try to interrupt and disrupt what is predicted to occur. You'll hear more about that later from one of my peers. Unfortunately, we're not always aware of where formally enrolled students go. As you know, as you may know, at the high school level, we're required to know where they go, or they count as dropouts if we don't know what program they've enrolled in. That same requirement and those same penalties don't necessarily exist K-8, and so we don't always know, though we hear from parents and families around what discussions on the playground. Sometimes we've heard that parents have made different choices about schooling based on, for example, kindergarten class size, where they might be able to choose a private school that can offer them a lower class size than we're currently able to offer in PPS.
I have a follow-up. It's not just, or at least my experience has been, and our school has a capture rate of anywhere, I've seen it anywhere from 59 to 60 something % over the 6 years that we've been at Atkinson, which is just one example, right? And it's been COVID over these years, right? My kid was a kindergartner in 2019-20, so certainly probably a different experience than other families who have older children. But we've seen that. We've also seen, so this low capture rate, but it's not just kids leaving to go to private school or things like that. Lots of kids are opting out of their neighborhood school, right? We're seeing, and PPS has many focus option schools. Families are choosing those options instead of neighborhood schools. And we also were part of the Southeast Guiding Coalition, so certainly boundary changes and disruption as a result of that has been an issue. But I'm curious if the district's having any conversation about, it feels a little bit like there's a culture of optioning your schools, right? Like, oh, maybe not this one, maybe this one, and it's internal, not just like broadly in the community. And I'm just curious, And often what we hear is like, well, that's a better school, right? The focus option is a better school than your neighborhood school. And I'm curious what conversations, if any, the district is having around these types of kind of internal mechanisms that are kind of creating, I think, a culture of school choice beyond maybe the baseline that's keeping our schools enrolled, right? Like if you willing to, if I don't get into Winter Haven, then we'll go to St. Ignatius, or if we don't get into creative science, then we'll go to Trackers. I'm making up, pulling things out of thin air. But I'm just curious if there are any conversations around kind of that focus option program kind of within the district.
While there aren't current conversations about focus options, what we are having conversations about as a part of our developing enrollment campaign and strategy is how can we market the brilliance and excellence of every school? We know that building strong schools across the board is going to be the answer to try to bring people back and have people choose Portland Public Schools as a premier school district. And so part of that work has been working with our Chief of Communications and a cross-functional section, Dr. Franco, our Chief of Schools, and some other stakeholders to think about how do we build and brand the system. And part of that is sort of this idea that like legacies are made at PPS. And then how do we build and brand each particular school with a focus on those zip codes that have seen the most enrollment decline.
I have the next question. Perfect timing and transition. Can you provide more details about the district's recruitment, retention, and recovery campaign aimed at increasing enrollment? What specific actions are being taken to bring students back to PPS and keep students there? And how will the district measure success?
Sure, thank you. Can you all hear me? Okay, good evening. Candace Gross, Chief of Communications. So we're gearing up, to your point, and sorry, I'm reading from my laptop. So we're gearing up for an enrollment campaign to start this fall, and included in this campaign will be messaging and highlights from each school, and then an overall highlight from the district regarding an array of great things that are happening. And so this is the RRR campaign is being executed through two parallel strategies. The first one is a global district-wide narrative, which is called Legacies Are Made at PPS, which focuses on the reigniting public trust and brand pride in PPS. And then the second part of that strategy is a localized school-specific outreach. That campaign is called Opportunities in Your Community, targeting neighborhoods with high student attrition and highlighting the unique programs and supportive environments within those local schools. And so we have been doing a lot of, for the last few months, actually, I think 3 months or so, doing a lot of data and research before we can even fully launch into this campaign. Some of that research includes Parent View, and I know my colleague will talk a little bit about that, but collecting data from Parent View, collecting data from the heat maps, different things like that, hearing feedback from community members, parents, teachers, just to hear why folks are unenrolling. But also another strategy and approach we've taken is sending out a survey to all building leaders to ask what makes your school great. I know we focus a lot on why they leave, but also trying to focus on why they stay so that we can highlight those parts in the campaign. And then the most important part is measuring success, right? Because we can do all this work and not know if any of this is actually working. And so some of that success we'll do some quantitative and qualitative measurements along the way. So of course, some of that will be enrollment increases in targeted schools and across the district overall, reduction in the number of unverified students in Parent View, family perception and satisfaction metrics collected through the fall and spring surveys. And then campaign engagement metrics, which, if we are doing media buys or ad spending, trying to figure out what the return on investment is, and visibility based on the targeted areas and approaches that we're taking for the campaign.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is that this goes well beyond as well, just kind of displaying the things that are great within PPS. I think what we have found through this as we get ready for a fall kickoff is that we need to be more standardized around best practice within buildings. And so another piece with this is creating standardized principal toolkits of how to increase enrollment and also attendance and those very specific things so that we're all on the same page. We've conducted focus groups as well with building leaders, very specifically ones who we know have been doing this work and doing it very well, that have outstanding community outreach. You know, what do their websites look like? What do newsletters look like? And so standardizing those approaches, those best practices across the district will be another mainstay for us as well.
Curious, I think if I understood you correctly, Mr. Adams, that the attrition rates were lower going from eighth and ninth grades?
They were stable.
Stable. Are you seeing anything with the new high schools that have been constructed recently, Franklin, Ida B. Wells, Lincoln? Is there any data that tells you that with the newer facilities you're seeing less attrition?
Yes, actually. Thank you for the question. I appreciate it. What we typically have seen is a bit of an enrollment dip while the school is under construction, specifically and more notably when we've had to shift students to the Marshall campus while their home campus was being deconstructed and reconstructed. And what we've seen at all of our modernized campuses is an enrollment bump. So we've seen an increase in enrollment once the new building has come online for those next few years, which then has trended a bit more stably in a positive direction for those schools.
So you would anticipate maybe a similar trend with the schools that are upcoming for improvements, the ones with the new
Yes, we
lines?
would.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Does that extend to the feeder schools? When you get a bump in the high school enrollment, does it filter down into the feeder schools?
I don't know that we've done an analysis, but that's a great question, so I'll have to take that back to the team.
Certainly like the middle school years.
Yeah.
So we know that one of the things that remains a possibility in the near future is school closures. Can you tell us more about why school closures might be one of the approaches for addressing PPS's challenges, and what are the advantages and disadvantages of this approach?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that a little bit. First, I just want to... Can you hear me okay? Okay, there we go. How many times I've been up here and I still can't figure the mic out. So first of all, I just want to acknowledge any level. I mean, I've been in education for 25 years and been doing this a long time. Anytime you think about or engage in a process around school optimization or school closure, boundary adjustments, those types of things, I mean, those hit emotional tones that are very difficult. And so the advantage is when we're talking about a $40 million shortfall and then potentially $30 million the following year, I mean, obviously I wouldn't say advantages, but those are things we have to think about because we're talking about trying to save money. And also I would say too, there's another piece around increasing program efficiency. So for example, some of the cost savings could be reduced operational costs, such as utilities, custodial, maintenance, transportation. I would also say there's a deferred maintenance piece, savings. I mean, older buildings, the reality is we have a lot of old buildings, and in order to maintain them, it costs money. Also, when we're thinking if, again, engaging in this conversation would also mean, again, school consolidation or potentially closing schools, that means the kids would have to go somewhere else, right? And so when you can increase the number of kids in a building or in a school, that leads to more funding and potentially more robust programming. I mean, that's just a reality, right? And specific to like the secondary, for example, the more kids you have, the more elective offerings you can have. I mean, that's just a reality. And I would say too, as part of the second question, I think you said, and I touched on it a little bit, the disadvantages, of course, is the ripple effect in school communities. I mean, that's just a reality. And like I said, as someone who's been a part of those pieces before, people attend schools within their communities for a reason. And so that just speaks to the importance of an important process of engagement that we would have to go through.
Thank you. As a follow-up, do you at this point have a timeline and a process to start making those decisions, or when you might do that?
Yeah, we are engaging. I would say this. I mean, the first piece is really to assemble a team to really kind of talk through, and then from that steering group, kind of outline what those projected next steps are. And so obviously that would involve multiple stakeholders. The school board would need to be involved. Obviously our superintendent would have to give us direction on that. But, you know, towards the end of this school year in June is when we're going to, right now is when we're going to start talking about it, and then obviously get a little bit more refined as we head into the fall.
I mentioned before that I had sat on the SCGC, the Southeast Guiding Coalition, right? I've been through the boundary process. Not a great process, right? Challenging personally, community-wide, and of course we did it kind of in the midst of COVID, which added a layer to it. But this, you know, school closures are not that they're different in some ways, certainly from a boundary shift, but this is a pretty contentious personal process, right? Communities will rise up and say, but our school is great, and these are all the reasons why, and we all have personal connections to our neighborhoods and our community. So can you tell us a little bit about what factors will be considered when weighing the choice to close which schools, and kind of how you plan to kind of mitigate that emotional reaction to whatever degree you can?
I appreciate the question and the thoughtfulness in which you're asking. I mean, I just want to come forward and say, of course, ditto what Dr. Franco has said about the process and being thoughtful and intentional to be on a timeline that will engage and bring in as many voices as possible. I think I've said from the start that anything around school closures, boundaries, it's a community conversation, and so we want to involve community as much as possible. I'm pretty confident that the way in which we do the work will be a model that can be used across the United States because it will be done well. It will include different voices, and the timeline, I think, will be fair. We'll use a resource, a group of individuals to be a resource to really synthesize and analyze the data that we're collecting on the decisions that we make. I think the reality and what we really want community to know is that, you know, even when we look at some of our schools with, if I look at DLI, for example, you know, there are schools where we have 7 kiddos enrolled in the neighborhood classroom because there's over 20 plus students in the dual language immersion. And that is the opposite in some other spaces, right? And so how do we look at all of our offerings, and not just from, you know, of course we want to be fiscally responsible. So not just from a, you know, how can we save money standpoint, but like, how are we setting up our schools for the next couple of generations to really optimize learning and the resources that are rich in the communities that are served. So it would be remiss of us to say that, like, you know, we have X amount of schools and here's the process without it being grounded in community. It could be that, you know, it's recommended that no schools are closed, and it's more of a reconfiguration of the programs that we have that can adequately distribute students in ways that set up environments to be more robust and allow us to use our resources better. So just really grounding in community and identifying the data that we'll use to move through those decisions are the very first steps.
As a veteran of some of these conversations in a previous life, have you thought about looking back? PPS has done this to varying degrees since at least 2005.
Right.
And it has been, there have been some positive things, there have been some not so positive things that came out of it. Are you looking back at some lessons that you might learn from past experience
Absolutely. The Southeast Guidance Coalition, I appreciate you mentioning that, will not be the model in which we deploy. And so no disrespect on the process, but we learn lessons as we go, correct? And so we know some lessons. We're also looking at school districts across the country where the work has moved well, like in San Antonio School District, and then in places where it didn't move so well, like San Francisco Unified, where I was educated. And so looking at those examples, not just in the state of Oregon, but even, across the nation, it's a benefit being a council district school because we have access to people and information and resources. And so, yes, data locally and examples and stories and information nationally.
I have a controversial opinion.
Sure.
I do not think Portland is a unicorn.
Yeah.
So I'm very glad to hear that you're looking at other examples that you might learn from.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We plan to do this in a way that will be a model for others to follow.
Yeah, I will say, despite my not super positive experience with SEGC, I am optimistic for this as in a school with lots of enrollment bobbles over the last several years. Like we've noticed, like when there isn't a fully enrolled school, the programming up, down, the staffing up, down, the loss of staff, experienced staff, having to rehire staff, class size going from 14 to 30 one year to the next, and every which way, full-time library, not full-time library. We've seen that our entire school experience, and I think despite how difficult this would be to kind of repair some of that or stabilize those things would make a huge difference to us, and I think people all over PPS.
And not just the learners, right? I mean, the employees, right?
Yes.
I don't think it feels good for employees to not be renewed every year or have the non-renewal letter and have to wonder about where they'll teach or where they'll support next, right? So stabilization, I would say, in multiple areas too.
I was curious, you mentioned your peer review with some of the different school districts. It may be too early to ask this question, but what did you learn or what do you think you might learn from San Antonio?
I appreciate their community process. And I've had a couple of conversations with their superintendent. We still want to do further case study, but their community process and really grounding in community and having those conversations, looking at data and not already going in with the end in mind. Oftentimes as educators, we're told from day one in the classroom, begin with the end in mind. Well, in a process like boundaries and school closure, we can't begin with the end in mind. We have to be open, we have to hear the stories, and we have to understand the impacts, not just in a local, right, year or two or three, but like generations, right? How are we setting up this district like good city planners, that plan for the road and the light rails and all of those things because they see 50 years from now the beauty of a city and what it can be. That's the same mindset that we want to deploy when we approach our work about the future of Portland Public Schools. What a beautiful place it will continue to be 50 to 60 years from now, and then how do we set up our schools to be optimized to serve families and students and to be a great place to work.
Thank you. Well, I don't envy your position and background in this process, and I have to admit to feeling a little bit relieved that my kids are almost out. I got one more to say about that, but thank you for the making the hard choices and doing the hard work. So I appreciate that. We've heard reports of since the pandemic of a dramatic increase in students who are chronically absent, and I think the number it's quoted is now over 36%. So over a third of students are deemed chronically absent, which is, when I saw that, was kind of a striking number. Can you talk about what the drivers are for this increase and what you all are doing to try to change the trend here?
Yeah, sure. Good evening. Thank you for the question. Jay Buono, Chief of Student Services. So chronic absenteeism, it's a complex issue. So as a district, we are addressing it through 3 data-driven processes. The first is the assert process, so it's attendance support and engagement response team, so that's at the school level. So each school has an assert team that addresses absenteeism data and develops individualized intervention plans for students. In addition to that, at the school level, each school supports attendance through their continuous improvement plan. And then at the district level this year, we implemented a work group that focused on root cause analysis and evidence-based intervention strategies that were being effective across our system. We then made recommendations to each school, to each assert team to support usage of those strategies. So what we know is that some root causes for chronic absenteeism are engaging instruction, students feeling a sense of belonging, relationships with peers, and being seen by a trusted adult. And that is some of the root causes because of the complexity related to chronic absenteeism. So each of our building leaders have identified attendance as a goal and or action step in their continuous improvement plan, as I identified. And each of our student service providers in schools are working as part of their assert teams and are targeting high leverage family engagement strategies such as home visits, individual and group skill development supports, student and family engagement strategies, which have been identified as one of the most effective intervention supports, and then monitoring and tracking the efficacy of each individual student's interventions. Several of our high-need schools this year have made significant gains in average daily attendance, which is a key indicator of progression towards chronic absenteeism. These improvements have reflect intentional student-centered strategies designed to remove barriers to attendance. Several of our schools have seen nearly 6, 7, 4% gains in chronic absenteeism because of these specific interventions I've identified. And these results demonstrate that a focus on these investments, such as family outreach, student mentorship, and then culturally specific focus practices are making tangible impact. The progress achieved by these schools highlight the importance of continuing and expanding effective attendance initiatives, particularly those supported by family and classroom engagement strategies and most intensive interventions provided by our student service providers. So we understand that the most impactful strategy for student attendance is the relationship in the connection between the student and their instructor in the classroom. And parent and family engagement is the strategy that is emphasized the most with supporting and closing attendance gaps for our chronically absent students, and that is what is emphasized across our system.
Thank you. Can you talk about how you define chronic absenteeism, and does this get to a point where it actually affects the funding for the district?
It can, yes, thank you for that question. So the state actually defines chronically absenteeism, and it means missing 10% of the school year, so.
16 days, 17
yeah.
days.
In a 180 school day year, which that's not what we have, but it would be 18 days. Yeah. So it's missing approximately a month of instruction.
Okay. And there's also reports about absenteeism being chronic among staff and teachers. What are your strategies to change that?
I'm playing Sharon Reese, our Chief Human Resource Officer, as she is out this evening. So I am actually going to read the response, and then if you have follow-up questions, we'll probably have to get back to you on that. Or I can just wing it, but probably, yeah, exactly. So it's true. In fact, there was an Oregonian article recently about this. Our district has seen an increase in leaves of over 250% over the last 6 years. Myriad of factors, COVID, expanded leave laws, and Oregon's new paid family leave laws have all contributed to this increase. Our teacher substitute fill rate averaged 92% each week this year, and we have 875 teacher substitutes. Following the ratification of teacher substitute collective bargaining agreement earlier this year, in October of 2024, our district implemented a new subset of teacher substitutes who commit to a schedule in advance, and then the district directs their placement in our highest needs, lowest fill rate schools. So that's been something that's been successful. And the fill rate for substitute paraeducators averages only about 50%, and so our district has been working on resources for filling these positions in the upcoming year. Overall, we take this commitment very seriously. I think the strategies that we're undertaking are vast and different, and it's obviously different depending on each person. I'll just comment on one thing that our superintendent has prioritized, which is building and maintaining strong relationships, and I think that's a key component of this. She has worked very closely with PAT and held 10 listening sessions when she started her tenure here, which in the evenings, several hours each night over a several month period, to really understand directly from our teachers and our leaders in our schools about the problems that they're experiencing and how we as a district can better serve their needs. So this is a work in progress.
Is there a distinction in terms of the, I'm trying to clarify, the students versus staff? So students, like demographically, like are we seeing higher absentee rates at a certain grade level band? Or is it kind of across the district, or is it is it at higher need schools versus like wealthier schools? Is there a breakdown, or is it kind of across the board we're seeing this?
I can get you more specific information, but there are disparities, yes.
Okay.
Can I, without betraying any confidences or information you're not ready yet to divulge, can you share anything about what the superintendent heard from teachers during these conversations about the drivers of absenteeism?
I think
if you don't want to, that's okay too.
I'm probably better to hear it from her. She was the one who sat through all those hours of listening, building relationships.
For the absenteeism for
teachers,
for
what
teachers.
You heard on your tour.
Yeah, I think I would say that one of the things that was lifted up was, there has been this concentrated effort to really highlight the way in which students were impacted during COVID and even in their families, and how it's impacted their return, or even, them just not choosing to come back. And one of the things that I heard from educators is that there doesn't seem to be that same conversation happening for the adults who serve in the system. And so I think some folks feel a little invisible first in the conversation, and then just the well-being of individuals and the impacts to families, I think is something new. And I think also when we think of COVID and the impact with the illnesses that happened, and those who have health sensitivities, I think is the term that we learn to use, just the impact of that, being in contact with germs every day, and folks a little bit more aware of the way in which their immune systems are intact or not, right? I know that there's been a lot of language around and a lot of conversation around some of the laws that definitely are more supportive for folks to be able to access leave. I'm approaching it with a asset-based mindset to say that our folks aren't well if they're not attending, and we need to make sure that we're centering health and wellness in our work as a system, and that we're seeing people and understanding why they're not showing up, so that we can begin to intervene and fix where we can fix, and offer solutions and support or other options when that's needed. And so that's primarily been the conversation. We just have to continue to pay attention to not just learning environments, but work environments as well. And, you know, I hope that with the improvement of our infrastructure and some of those things that will just automatically be addressed, that means that our classrooms will be healthier, safer places to be. So we thank our voters.
I was going to ask if it's informing decisions or planning around modernization and, you know, HVAC systems and that sort of thing.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. That's that last sentence about just really doing all that we can in an expedited way to make sure that our classrooms are well protected from germs and airborne things.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Out of curiosity, is there a correlation between start times and absenteeism? And have you seen any shifts in the schools and the grades that you've shifted over the past year?
Well, I'm sorry, I can say this. The data does identify more chronic absenteeism in our secondary grades. I mean, I don't have an analysis specifically to start time in relationship to that, but as far as disparities, there is more chronic absenteeism at the secondary, so middle school and high school level. But I'd have to look more specifically.
I mean, is there research that you start later, more kids are going to come to school for those secondary students?
There was a lot of research prior to the pandemic related to chronic absenteeism. There was a lot of research prior to the pandemic related to dropout, intervention that was connected to start time. So both of those things. There's since been a lot of research after the pandemic that has changed some thoughts.
Muddied the waters.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
One last follow-up. During my days as a parent, I know the weird weeks with the shortened days, either from the bottom or the top, were kind of nightmarish to deal with. And I hear a lot from current parents that the problem has not only not gone away, it may actually be a little more difficult to deal with. Have you looked at what kind of impact the variances in weekly schedule might be having on absenteeism?
So I think you might be talking about, for example, some of our high school schedules with AB schedules and.
No, I'm talking about a shortened day.
Or
it's a Friday, but we're not having school.
Or the 16, right? The CBRC, it was in the CBRC report, right? We only have 16 out of 38 weeks that are full 5-day weeks of school, less than a third. And so I think after CBRC said it, and certainly parents are having the conversation because we're regularly, Monday's off again. Mm-hmm. What's the childcare look like, but also just the momentum in the classroom, right? Mm-hmm. It gets hard we're back from spring break, but Friday and Monday are now off. It was like the Wednesday before spring break was a half day. You had a whole week of school. Then you had 4 days. And then you had a Friday and a Monday off again. And then I think we're just asking what are the conversations around absenteeism related to kind of full weeks of school?
No, thank you. I appreciate that clarification. I do know that over the course of this last year, we have a committee of folks that works to put together that schedule and includes representation from labor partners and building leaders and other folks from the district. And I know that a significant amount of feedback was gathered specifically in relationship to that. And I know that consideration was involved in development of the schedule moving into next year, and the impact of not only attendance but just the interruption in instruction. So,
is it better next year?
I know that it directly was.
I haven't counted.
It was directly impactful in the development of the schedule. I
Okay.
don't.
Well, I'll go home and count. Full disclosure, Rita and I both sat on CBRC, so we're champions of your Community Budget Review Committee. Todd, I think we've got time for our last question.
Great, thank you, Harmony. We want to talk a little bit about the bond. Congratulations on having the passage of the May bond issue. One of the more topical and recent investments that the school board and the district have decided to make are doing seismic improvements. And according to your website, you're looking at 8 to 10 schools to do seismic improvements that pose the greatest risk for a significant seismic event. However, the number of schools that would be eligible for these kinds of improvements is far greater than the 8 to 10 sites that you've identified on your website. Have you done a prioritization, or will you do a prioritization of which schools will be first in line for these seismic upgrades?
Thanks for the question. I'm Stormy Shanks. I'm the Senior Director of the Office of School Modernization. Yes, we are in the process of that prioritization and planning effort right now. We think of it in 3 steps. That first step was to identify all the seismic deficiencies across all of our school buildings, and that step is complete. That report is available on our website right now from our structural engineer. And that report includes a rough cost estimate to correct those deficiencies. The total cost of that, with all project costs considered, would be a little over $1 billion. The second step is to have that, our structural engineer is going to take a look at that accounting of all the deficiencies and provide us with a prioritization that's based on a set of criteria that we've worked with them to develop. That criteria is the structural risk score, which is calculated based on FEMA standards. And so it's based on the year of construction of the building or building part. Not all of our school buildings were built in one shot and have only one type of structural system. So it's the year of construction of the building part and the structural system type. And then any seismic improvements that have already been completed on those building parts. That would give it kind of a seismic structural risk score. And then we're also factoring in an importance factor that takes into account sort of the occupancy of the space that the deficiency would affect. So we would, an importance score on a storage room or a boiler room would be different than that of a gym or a classroom, for example. And then the third step would be to take that structural engineering evaluation and evaluate it through our own PPS priority criteria. Those criteria have not yet been defined, but they would look like things like, is this school planned for a consolidation from our school optimization efforts that are happening, or looking at kind of the feasibility of completing the project while the school is operating, or if it would need, if those students would need to move to a swing site while that construction work is done. So that is kind of the 3 steps that we think of in this planning and prioritization phase of the seismic improvement program.
So if my numbers are right, you had $1 billion identified, and you have maybe 10-12% available in the bond proceeds, at least initially. So if you find the need greater, would you be looking at other resources within the bonded authority to do more seismic work than what had initially been planned?
So we, there are other sources of funding available. We do get seismic retrofit grants from the state from time to time. Those are limited in their amount and how many we're eligible for per year. So we'll always be pursuing those grants to augment the bond funding. And then to, so I think part of the other question is, could we allocate more of the 2025 bond funds to the seismic improvements than?
Are there trade-offs that would be available to do that? Yeah.
So, you know, the answer is yes, that the board could decide to prioritize more 2025 bond funding for seismic improvements. The trade-offs would be that, you know, we have a facilities condition assessment that has identified over $1 billion worth of deficiencies in our existing conditions for our buildings. And it has, it characterizes the average facility condition of our schools as poor. In order to maintain an
Is that a scale of 10?
What's that?
Is that a 4 out of 10?
Poor. P-O-O-R.
Poor. Oh, sorry.
Yep. It's poor on a scale of 10. So in order to maintain an existing facilities condition, we need to engage in a program of capital improvement, because every year more things would be added to the deficiency list if we do nothing. So that staff estimates that would be a $150 million annual capital improvement program to maintain that poor condition average. What's that? Yep, maintain a poor condition, yes. And then we also have our long-range facilities plan that identifies high-priority improvements that don't actually address existing conditions at all. So those are things like adding cooling, improving our athletics facilities, and improving the kind of educational, how well our buildings facilitate the educational goals that we have. And those are things that are not addressed in a facilities condition assessment, for example, and neither is seismic, actually. And so that scope of work would cost many billions of dollars to address. And the 2025 bond planning documents allocate $190 million to deferred maintenance and priority scope items. And the seismic improvements are a subcategory of that. So the trade-off would be we could spend more money on seismic improvements. That would leave less available to correct significant deficiencies that are going to affect the operation of our schools.
So when you get to the point of prioritizing for the seismic work, do you anticipate working or at least consulting with the county and the city about strategic priorities for seismic resilience?
We don't have that on our plan right now.
I mean, for a while, I mean, my info's old, but for a while we were doing sort of active collaboration with the emergency management bureaus in both the county and the city.
Mm-hmm.
Has that continued, and is that going to factor at all? Because I can imagine there might be like strategic locations where upgrading the seismic resilience of a particular school might be much more consequential than someplace else.
That work has continued more in our modernizations as we strategize about the level of resiliency that we are including in those projects particularly for the high schools. And because this work of the 2025 bond seismic improvement program is just beginning, we haven't sort of conceptualized what that might look like yet.
Allison's gonna have our last.
I have just a quick follow-up about facilities. Like in that larger pool of funds that you mentioned in terms of maintenance, does that account for any issues that might come up? Like 2 years ago, we saw the ice storm that destroyed essentially schools. And so I'm wondering, like, as we move forward with climate change and natural disasters occurring like that, is that part of that funding pool that would have some funds allocated towards contingencies like that?
Yes, so the board's resolution that prioritized seismic improvements also noted that the first priority for those deferred maintenance and priority scope funds identified in the 2025 bond planning documents is a $100 million set aside for end-of-life replacements and essentially things that are about to affect our ability to operate as a school building. So that's part of that amount is addressing those things that are going to basically keep us from having students in buildings.
Okay, that'll close our discussion for tonight. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone. Obviously not easy topics. We appreciate the transparency and thoughtfulness with which you've engaged with us and with the public as a whole as we kind of move through the hard for the foreseeable future. So we have a little business to do, so I will close the hearing and open a regular business meeting of the TSCC. Commissioners, do you have any additional comments on the budget? Okay. Allegra, can you please provide the staff recommendation for the certification letter?
Yes, and first, just a huge thank you to PPS budget and finance staff. We so appreciate your partnership through the budget process and throughout the year. We know, as the superintendent mentioned earlier, that it has been a challenging last couple of years, and just the professionalism and diligence has been so clear. We as staff found the budget estimates to be reasonable for the purposes stated and in substantial compliance with budget law. Staff suggests no recommendations or objections to the fiscal year 25-26 approved budget.
Thank you. May I have a motion authorizing the commission to sign the certification letter with no objections or recommendations as recommended by staff?
I'll move.
I'll second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The PPS budget for 25-26 is so certified by TSCC. Allegra follows up right away with our certification letter so you can package everything for your budget adoption. We wish you the best of luck through the rest of the budget cycle and through the hard times ahead. We'll try and stay optimistic like your superintendent continues to be.